I think that Biden has a good chance of winning, has a very, very, very strong chance of winning. But with Trump's constant attacks on democracy, it is certainly not for granted. And that voter suppression has to be fought tooth and nail. Convention was interesting. Obviously, there's a lot to criticize. There's a lot I don't like about the Democratic Party. One thing they did really well that you can't really do with an in-person convention is kind of representing a lot of working people across states and having them kind of tell their stories. And while they were obviously doing it to posture themselves as being the saviors of the working class, the thing that it does is like really genuinely properly talk about the issues of the working class and put a face to them rather than making Nancy Pelosi the face of any kind of empowered worker movement, which is, obviously extremely hypocritical and just very inauthentic. Like, I want to hear stories about elevator operators and Joe Biden as someone who wants to beat Trump. That's the thing that I'm interested in. And that's the thing that working Americans that you're trying to get to vote for Biden over Trump are probably interested in. You want material solutions and you want labor testimonials on those solutions. Which, hey, look, a $15 an hour minimum wage is a positive policy plan, right? A Green New Deal, even if it is a Green New Deal light, is a positive policy plan. Extending healthcare access to, to the point where it's basically guaranteed for anyone under 150 to 200% of the poverty level is a good policy plan. So from that standpoint, it's those are good decisions. Obviously, I don't like the parade of neoliberals. I didn't like John Kasich being on the air. I don't like that liberal friends of mine are starting to cozy up to him or warm up to him. He is pure evil, and he's a snake. But, the real thing I dislike is the rehabilitation of anybody who is involved in presenting the Iraq War to the public.
Brother. What have I got myself into?
So Colin Powell I could have lived without. I kind of get what they're going for. There's a lot of moderates, a lot of Republicans, a lot of war hawks who dislike Trump, who take Colin Powell seriously. And creating the pretext to vote for Biden over Trump for a lot of conservatives could be valuable in beating Trump. The moral implications of sanitizing Colin Powell's image to the public is really, really, really just extremely problematic. Especially where he was talking about, Joe Biden will listen to his advisors, when Colin Powell's entire defense for the Iraq War was that he was lied to by the key advisors in the Bush administration. There's a disconnect there, right? That you want to be the last person telling someone to trust their advisors, because your trust of your advisors was what led to the single greatest foreign policy disaster in the century so far, obviously, but since Vietnam. And one of the two worst foreign policy decisions in American history, for sure, including Vietnam, or next to Vietnam. So I don't like the presence of Colin Powell. I feel like they could have found someone else to go to. Maybe they couldn't find anyone else. I kind of get what they were going for. I'm not necessarily against the concept of broadening the coalition to beat Trump. And at the end of the day, the convention is not it's not a definitive design of a party platform. That's something that I've come to realize by listening to people a lot more educated than me on the left struggle in party politics. But yeah, I wanted to hear more worker voices and less so, say, the Clintons. I think that Bill Clinton probably reached most of the people that Colin Powell could. I don't like Bill Clinton. I don't think Hillary had any place speaking at the convention. I think she's political toxic. I think that Bill Clinton probably had a. I hate Bill Clinton, and I was turned around on. I thought he was also politically toxic, and like morally he's toxic, but politically, I get that there is a strong force of moderate to right leaning people who definitely respect him. It's just that like I'm not sure if Bill Bill Clinton and Colin Powell are reaching, complementary audiences or mutually supplementary audiences. I feel like they may have like a massive overlap. So I feel like maybe choosing one or the other was better. But I don't know. I don't like any of these people. I just don't like I don't like normalizing a sexual predator in a campaign where you are trying to present a serious moral high ground. And I don't like normalizing a war criminal against a campaign that has been really good at weaponizing anti-war populism against you. So I feel like they should have chosen one or the other, politically speaking. And then, obviously just it's something that sits very uneasy with me in both situations. That said, like, the Trump campaign is seriously floundering. One kind of silly remark that I hear a lot of leftists say is that Joe Biden has all of the same problems that Hillary Clinton does, which is just not true. And we're kind of seeing it in the Trump's in the Trump campaign's the ads that the Trump campaign is coming out with. That if you're on the Trump campaign right now, it feels like you're not quite sure what your message is, because they can't find anything that sticks. The benefit of running against Hillary Clinton was they were running against someone who had a meticulous smear campaign orchestrated and run against her for the better part of 20 years. And they were able to capitalize on that once she entered the national fray. Combined with the fact that obviously she has a terrible record on multiple issues and was god-awful at running a general election campaign. And then combine that with an extremely well-orchestrated 20-year-long Republican project to smear her and to traffic in the worst kinds of sexism against her. Defeating her was uniquely easy, probably in a way that no other Democrat could have lost to Trump, including Bernie Sanders, in my opinion. I then talked for a little bit about possible reasons that it's harder to nail Joe Biden to his Me Too accusations than, say, in 2016 it was to smear Hillary for her husband's predatory behavior, aside from the obvious sexism involved. But to be honest, I'm not too happy with how that footage turned out. I'm sure the topic will come up again in the next couple months, but for now we're going to skip to the core topic of the video. So it's really, really difficult if you're the Trump campaign to find a winning strategy because you don't have a narrative that sticks. There's just no narrative in existence that sticks onto Joe Biden the way that crooked Hillary stuck onto Hillary, because every single action you can attack Hillary on, right? Supporting TPP that is considered to have screwed over workers, supporting NAFTA that is considered to have screwed over workers, that those were actions of corporate allegiance. Like, nobody attacked Hillary Clinton during the Trump campaign as a radical leftist. She was attacked as corporate Hillary. It was an anti-establishment rhetoric. It was 100% anti-establishment rhetoric. There was no radical leftist agenda bullshit being spun. It was full on drain the swamp, drain the swamp, drain the swamp. Hillary was considered the swamp. She used a private email server as Secretary of State. We don't have to talk about whether that was the right or wrong thing to do, or whether it was a normal or abnormal thing to do, none of that really matters when we're assessing the politics of it. The reason the private email server hurt her and it doesn't hurt someone else is that it fits into a larger narrative about her. She uses a private email server for a public job. What is she hiding, right? That's the first question that you ask. What is she hiding? Immediately it paints corruption. Benghazi, Benghazi, Benghazi. Like, what is she hiding? And that's what brought up the email servers, right? And then there comes a point where the narrative becomes strong enough that Benghazi hurts her because it's just a sticking point, right? But it wasn't really what hurt her. Benghazi wasn't the corruption allegation, right? Benghazi was the incompetence allegation. And that didn't stick as much as Benghazi led to the discovery of the email server. And that was what hurt her because that was a corruption charge. So the main charge that we've gotten on her is that she engages in dubious behavior to cover up for her political cronies. She gets into really bad trade deals to cover up for her political cronies. Here she's a corporatist, right? She's covering up for her plutocrat friends. She engages in smear campaigns against people her husband has had an affair with, in order to cover up for her husband, who is her number one political crony, right? So there is a very strong narrative of corruption that was wielded against Hillary Clinton. And if you look at how the Trump campaign is running against Joe Biden, they just can't find that narrative anywhere. That's why one ad will talk about Joe Biden's cognitive ability, and then the other one will talk about Joe and Kamala's radical leftist agenda, and then the other one will talk about Joe's like how Joe was like hates the black community, I guess. There is no consistent narrative on Joe Biden. And it comes forward. Like, it comes through. The number of people you're going to reach with so inconsistent a narrative is going to be a lot fewer than when you have someone like Hillary Clinton and you can just say corrupt, 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 crooked Hillary, crooked Hillary, crooked Hillary, crooked Hillary. It's funny because Joe Biden is worse on trade. He's worse on healthcare. He's worse on all of these issues in a vacuum than Hillary Clinton was. But I think the things that obviously ran against Hillary were, one, she is more corrupt than Joe Biden. That doesn't make her prohibitively corrupt or more corrupt than any other Democrat in government, and certainly much less corrupt than your average Republican in government. But because of the way that she entered the political atmosphere, she was as corrupt as your average politician. I would say Joe Biden's less corrupt than your average politician. But she was as corrupt as your average politician. She was enough in the political spotlight that being a woman, she could not get away with it. Which ultimately that hurt her, and relatively speaking, it helps Joe Biden. The other thing, of course, is that Joe Biden has not spent his entire life in the political spotlight the way that Hillary Clinton has. Hillary Clinton has been pretty much consistently running for president since 2000, right? The moment she entered the Senate, it was clear that she was going to try and be the first woman president. While Biden's career in the Senate has largely been about running for president, has never been the focus of his career. That's a part of the reason that he didn't run in 2016. It was very viable that he could run in 2016, and of course the death of his son was a serious reason he didn't. But it was also because it was not his life's project. I really... It's funny because that's what I was kind of banking on for him not to run in 2020. But unfortunately, he decided that when Charlottesville happened, he was the savior, the anointed savior of the American people. So anyway. So yeah, Biden just didn't spend enough time in the political spotlight to get smeared the way that Hillary did. And also to perform the political malfeasances that Hillary kind of, you almost have to if you are that intent on becoming president, right? Which is part of the reason that the person who which is part of the reason that the person who wants that badly to be president is never the best person for the job. Biden has done the political self-service of not running for president his entire life, which has made him a little bit less subject to the concern trolling scrutiny of the Republican Party, right? I say I don't want to paint scrutiny itself as a bad thing, because everyone should be scrutinized, and I think the way that the left scrutinizes Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden is really good. The way the right does it, just because we both dislike Joe Biden, doesn't mean that we should enable the way the right does it. What the right does is they take a bunch of issues that they don't give a shit about, and then virtue signal about how important they are, right? So yeah, that's why every different attack ad on Joe Biden is a different attack ad, because they just can't find a narrative that sticks on him, right? Is he corrupt? Not really. Like, they can't get Burisma to stick on him. It's not working. They can't get, because at the end of the day, like, Burisma is not good, right? Burisma is an example of the swamp, but it's not a big enough example of the swamp to, like, tag his entire profile to. And the guy has a pretty squeaky clean political, like, career record in terms of not his voting record, but rather in terms of, like, his conduct, right? There's nothing else really to paint him as corrupt, right? Like, the Tara Reid allegations is just one allegation. It's a little flimsy. It's not the same as, say, Juanita Broderick coming out and saying that Bill Clinton literally raped her. Which I really cannot comment as to the credibility of Broderick's allegations. But the allegations are, in the very least, more redoubtable because Bill Clinton is a demonstrated sexual predator. In the case of Joe Biden, there's just nothing to tack on to him, right? You can't really call him a sexual predator. There's not enough substance there. You can't call him corrupt. There's not enough substance there. You can call him a corporatist, but in no worse ways than Trump is, so there's no substance there. You have to, like, nail him. You have to nail him in a way that, like, and it's harder for Trump this time around because a lot of things he could accuse Hillary of before he became president, he can't do against Biden because he has demonstrated that he is the swamp, right? Like, at the end of the day, he has to show that Joe Biden is a bigger portion of the swamp, right? I think, like, Trump could beat Hillary again. I don't think he can beat Biden again. Or he can beat Biden running for re-election. Maybe he could have done it if not for COVID. And I guess maybe there's an argument that if not for COVID, people will be more susceptible to smear campaigns against Biden. I think there's a general bias toward voting against Trump that really gets in Trump's way when he's trying to smear Biden. Like, the smears have to be a lot better because he's kind of he's swimming against the current. He's kind of swimming against the current when he's campaigning against Biden in a way that he wouldn't with COVID. We'd still have a fairly down economy, and there would still be the possibility to beat Trump either way. I think Bernie would be a lot better if not for... Yeah, so this was kind of the image that I had of Joe Biden in the campaign, was that he was kind of easy to attack and easy to smear. And I think that that is a valid argument against Joe Biden in a pre-COVID world. But I feel like the worse the economy is and the worse people's material situation generally is, the less amenable they are to an incumbent president trying to paint somebody as worse than him, right? They're willing to put up with worse. The better Americans are doing under the status quo of Trump's presidency, the more likely they are to listen to Trump smearing his political opponents. But the more dissatisfied they are with Trump, the more likely they are to say, you know what, Joe Biden seems like a decent enough person. And the more dissatisfied you are with the status quo, the better an opinion you are naturally biased toward having when it comes to any alternative to your current situation. You know, it's kind of the grass is always greener on the other side. The more dissatisfied you are with the current existence of things, the more likely you are to buy into a narrative where the alternative is better. And the less likely you are to protect that status quo, and the less likely you are to believe that it is better than the alternative. So let's say that we are in a fairly down economy, a recession is clearly about to happen, but we don't have a COVID-19, which has basically led to a complete economic crisis and collapse. Trump is running the same ads, calling Joe Biden a racist, calling Joe and Kamala radical leftists who are here to help immigrants come in and steal our jobs, trying to pose the economic downturn as an issue of immigration, and generally, questioning Joe's cognitive ability, talking about Burisma. These are all things that might stick because Americans are not suffering enough under current leadership to resist that kind of rhetoric. Trump's campaign is just not able to succeed. I think that Hillary, even during COVID, would have gotten destroyed because the narrative against her is so consistent. Against Biden, it's just not the same. There's just no consistent narrative against him. There was one thing talking about like racist stuff he said, and he's committed like a bunch of microaggressions and generally just has said dumb stuff and gaffed a lot. So they basically mixed together a bunch of gaffes from the past 40 years and then compiled it with situations in which he said something that was clearly in a very anti-racist context, but using terminology that was okay at the time that isn't anymore. Like using a term for Black Americans that is a racial slur now, but wasn't considered a racial slur in the 70s. So like that kind of stuff. And this is a quote from 1973, right? And obviously it's reflective of a time where he was, this is still like a super boomer. This is a silent generation dude who doesn't quite get it in every way and sometimes can be out of touch. But at the end of the day, he is currently in many different ways on the right side of history, especially on social issues, and just doesn't have a picture-perfect narrative to paint against him. So it's difficult because there's only that one ad. You take together Biden's entire career and all you get is one lousy ad. The reason Hillary had a successful campaign run against her is that every single ad fed into the same narrative, and it was a million different ones. Every single one was about crooked Hillary. One was about emails. One was about Bill Clinton. One was about black issues. One was about, God knows, like Monica Lewinsky. The other was about TPP, and then another was about NAFTA, right? And the emails were the centerpiece of it. Biden does not have emails. Without emails, Hillary wins easily because that is the backbone of the corruption charge against her. And Biden does not have an analog for that. Like, Burisma is peripheral. NAFTA is peripheral. TPP is peripheral. Even the 94 crime bill is peripheral because he is moving into the country sees Kamala Harris as a radical, black nationalist activist. No, that's not how the country sees her. But, the people that the people that Trump is trying to win over see Kamala Harris as left-leaning. So they can't use Kamala Harris as, the way that we see her as a member of the prosecutorial state. He can't use Kamala Harris against Biden on black issues the way that he could use the crime bill against Hillary on black issues. It's funny because Joe Biden wrote the crime bill, but like again, there's no centerpiece to that charge, and it's very clearly showing in the way that the campaign is kind of floundering against Biden. They just can't find a centralized point, and their ads, they contradict each other. They say that Joe and Kamala are trying to promote a radical leftist agenda and they're trying to transform the country. And in the next ad, what they're saying is that Joe Biden is too incompetent to accomplish anything as president. Like, those are directly contradictory terms. How is Joe Biden a radical leftist and also like massively anti-black, right? So yeah, they're seriously desperate, trying to attach any narrative that they can onto Joe Biden, and it shows because all of the narratives that they're going for are inherently contradictory of each other. Like they're trying to paint Joe and Kamala as like radical leftist, like BLM Antifa activists, and then saying that Joe Biden is a raving racist, right? It like these narratives undermine each other. And while most people don't think purely rationally in those terms, when people are going through serious economic hardship under the current administration, it's hard to get them to buy into a narrative without making it a little bit more self-supporting. And to have ads like these undermining each other, Joe and Kamala are radical leftists, and yet Joe is very anti-black. Like, how do those narratives line up? Joe is trying to execute a radical leftist agenda in the White House, but he's also too sleepy to stand up and he's too ineffective to get anything done. How do those narratives line up? I have not seen any two anti-Joe Biden ads tell messages that are remotely mutually conducive. And that is a serious problem for the Trump campaign. And the reason that they're not able to do it is just they can't find something. Running against Hillary Clinton was a massive gift to them. So all of this to say, like, the only way that they're going to be able to win the election is by suppressing votes. They're hoping that they can get just enough Republicans not to vote for Joe Biden by painting him as a leftist. They're trying to get just enough black people not to vote for Joe Biden by painting him as anti-black. They're trying to get just enough people not to vote for Joe Biden by saying he'd be worse at dealing with COVID. On that last count, there's absolutely like no one they can reach. But all of this in tandem with, quite frankly, preventing as many people from voting as possible through their attacks on voter registration, on mail-in voting, and on the USPS. If Biden wins, it's going to be extremely close. Because the Trump campaign cannot find anything to tag him on, but what they do have is a decades-long experiment of voter suppression, and they're going heavily on that. So I think that Biden has a good chance of winning, has a very, very, very strong chance of winning, but with Trump's constant attacks on democracy, it is certainly not for granted. And that voter suppression has to be fought tooth and nail. So yeah, I mean, I definitely like Biden's chances. There's a serious voter suppression project working against him, and if Trump wins re-election, it's going to be off the heels of that. So he is by no means guaranteed to win. He has a very solid chance. The idea that he is going to win no matter what is not an excuse not to vote for him, because it's going to be a very close election. And the excuse that he has no chance is also ridiculous, because he has a very good chance. The Trump smear project is not remotely as effective against him as it was against Hillary Clinton. And listen, I want people to have health care. I want people to have wages. I want the labor movement to have any chance at gaining power in the next 30 to 40 years. And the only way to do that is to prevent Trump from basically ending our democracy. So we absolutely need to elect Joe Biden. It's a matter of our survival. We should continue to primary Democrats, protect Ed Markey's seat, continue to win races on every state, local, community level, continue to organize. But like at the end of the day, you know, there's an ongoing war that we have against the Democratic Party that is absolutely important for us to continue, but we can't cut off our face to spite the nose, right? Like you have to defeat the greater threat whilst continuing to war amongst, ourselves and the corporatists within our ranks, which that is what we are, right? The Democrats are the left of center party in America, and the left of center factions have to dispute amongst themselves. And at the end of the day, we need to defeat Democrats. But we also need to make sure that there is any power in the center for us to affect change once we're in control of the Democratic Party. And part of that ensures making sure that fascists don't continue to hold the reins of the government. These are not mutually exclusive, and neither of them is optional. We have to continue to make change in the Democratic Party enough to create viable third-party voting, or just, create a labor-viable Democratic Party if that's possible. I think the former is more likely than the latter, but we have to do one or the other, and both of those involve electing Joe Biden and gaining power within the party. Just burning it down isn't going to work because we don't have the power to burn down the Democratic Party. America's labor movement does not have that level of support. And secondarily, if we burn down the only actual powerful party that is preventing fascism from taking control of America, then there's not going to be a country left to save once the labor movement gains power within our own relative faction. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more content, the best thing you can do to support the channel is to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for future videos. I will be covering all sorts of topics like the election, Biden, Trump, the global far right, healthcare, and a lot of different topics going forward. If you'd like to join the discussion live, I stream to Twitch Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Otherwise, stay tuned for future videos. Thanks so much for watching.